In today's podcast, I want to talk a little bit about the new US President Joe Biden and his next steps, and maybe also where the US is, going. And before we look a little more into that, I want to go back to his inauguration speech, and I just want to hear from you. How did you like it, or what did you think of it personally?
Well, personally, I felt that the message was a good message, a good inaugural address. It was a message about unity and about hope and about our way forward as a country, especially given the events that happened on January the 6th with the insurrection at the Capitol, as well as just in general the past 4 years under the Trump administration and the kind of divisiveness that has been created within the country. I felt that his message, the tone of the message, was one of togetherness, of trying to chart a path together forward as a nation. And I felt like it was the right message for the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it was one of the few in your inauguration speeches that I actually watched live, and was interesting. And I think I also got this feeling, even though I don't live in the US, that, what you talked about. I mean, you really had this feeling that, there was, or the new president seriously believes in these kind of things and these values. And maybe we can talk a little later a bit about more what he actually has done already to like kind of support what he has actually said in there. So, where we look at how he backed up what he said with his actions. And in regard to the inauguration speech and the whole process, I have, I found it interesting because I saw some, I don't know how to call it, symbolic features during the address, basically, because, there were, like presenters from different ethnic minorities. And it seemed to be like that, Joe Biden really or intended and actually, did it to take everyone in the boat in one boat, basically. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Well, I think that has been the theme of Joe Biden's candidacy for president, was that he wanted to create a coalition of people from very diverse backgrounds, because he wanted to create an image that is indicative of the United States, right? We are a melting pot of different cultures and different ethnicities. And I think it was on full display with his inauguration. People from all walks of life, all backgrounds were represented for the most part in the inauguration.
That was interesting, yeah. I mean, so we already know how you found basically the inauguration speech, and I'm just curious, how was it, received in the US in general? What was the feeling amongst amongst Americans, basically?
I think as a whole, it was embraced positively. People from the conservative side of the country, I think, appreciated the message that Joe Biden delivered. There wasn't a huge sense of partisanship within the speech. I think people from both sides of the country, the conservative side as well as the liberal side of the country, recognize that at this very moment in time, we need to be unified, that we need to come together to address the issues that our country faces. And I felt as though, from what I've read and what I've heard, that, as a whole, the speech was embraced well from the mass majority of people.
I mean, that's interesting also what you've just mentioned, because I think, the world and the US, so it was not only the Americans, but the world in general saw that this, this experiment that started like 4 years ago, I would say, to see if, if a division, or if if some more extreme views and opinions would actually lead to, a better America or more unity, and the opposite actually happened. And I think this is something that, also when I read the reactions from around the world or something, or especially like, how Europeans reacted to the the speech, and so it was very positive and stuff. And I think like the whole world has seen that you basically need to come together if you want to move anything forward, and taking a stance for something, and not listening to anyone else about it is not really an effective way of how to move forward in in our society, now and definitely in the future, right?
Well, I think when Donald Trump became president, he was a novelty. He had never served in politics. People did not quite know how he would operate in the political spectrum. And I think there was a sense of cautious optimism that even though he had a certain rhetoric or he had a certain style of speech, that he would lead the country in a more mainstream kind of way. And so in the beginning, I think there were a lot of people who were, cautiously optimistic. They said, okay, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to wait. I'm going to see how this plays out. I'm going to give him an opportunity to prove himself to be a capable president, the capable leader of the free world. But I think that quickly kind of diminished as he began to use very divisive kind of rhetoric in his speeches and in his tweets and the things that he posted on social media and the interviews that he conducted. On the flip side, right, Joe Biden is a known entity. He wasn't a novelty item, right? I mean, we all knew who Joe Biden was. He served in politics for 40 years. And he was seen, I think, or he's still new rather as president, but he's being seen now as a steady hand, right? I mean, you know what you're going to get. There isn't a lot of unpredictability with Joe Biden because you know who he is. He's been around for a long time. And so I think with that comes also a sense of going back to normalcy, right? Going back to tried and true practices that we believe to work. And I think the international community also appreciates that because there is a bit more statesmanship and a bit more, predictability and how Joe Biden and his administration will conduct itself on the global stage.
I mean, that was also interesting what you just mentioned. And I think this is something that, for someone who's not, more aware of these things, that I think what we underestimate is how much knowledge you actually need to function well as a politician, right? Because we always, we're quick to judge and be like, yeah, I can do this job better. But, as we have seen, like, maybe even a more capable person with no political experience would have had, faced similar results in the end, because it's it might be generally true that if you haven't operated in this kind of environment yet, that it will be very difficult for you to speak, to walk the walk and talk the talk, if you know what I mean. I think this might also be one of the reasons. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I think prior to Donald Trump, businessmen, celebrities floated with the idea of running for president. We had Arnold Schwarzenegger, who became the governor of California. And so there were examples of people coming from, or let's say not coming from a political background to executive government positions. But it was up until Donald Trump that I think we recognized that not having any political background may be more of a liability than an asset to a person. And I imagine that now going forward, it's going to be more difficult for people without any political background to run for president and win a nomination for one of the major parties in the country because of Donald Trump and because maybe of this skepticism that a person who doesn't have any political background can know how Washington works to be able to get things done so that we move the country forward. Because it's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to say, I'm a businessman, I run a big corporation or a big company, or maybe even a small company, but I know how to get Washington to work for the people. You know, depending where you come from, of course, if you're a supporter of Donald Trump, you will say he did a very good job. But if you look at his record and if you look at what he was able to get done, his resume is quite short, right? And it may be, I'm not analyzing his presidency, but I think it may be due to the fact that he didn't have the political acumen and the political background, and also he didn't necessarily surround himself with people who had a huge, amount of experience from the, from the public and governmental background and the political background. And so
are you saying what is also important is that basically, you know, these, like, if you're an established politician, you have the trust of people as well in a way, and if you don't have, you know, this kind of status or this kind of, like, I don't know, that you might be people don't know what to expect, and that's why they might not trust you as much as they would if they know that someone has been in the political scene for like 25 years and they know this person's not a loose cannon basically, but they know what to expect. Is that also an aspect?
Well, I think it's the naivete, right? I mean, if you don't come from a political background, like I said, it's easy to say you're going to do this and you're going to do that, but you may be naive about what you can actually get done because you don't maybe fully understand the complexities that go into politics, right? It's not just making a bill and voting on it, right? There's backdoor willing and dealing that has to happen. That I'm not necessarily saying is a good thing, but it's a part of politics, right? And if you don't understand how that works, and if you don't understand what it takes to get your vision into action and into law, then are you going to be viewed as success? And to your point, are people going to trust that you are the person to get the job done? And so I think going forward, I think personally, people may have a more positive view of politicians running for president as opposed to, people who don't have any political background trying to run for president.
Interesting. I can see that. So let's move on with like a question that I would have about, the future. Like, where do you think the US is going under Joe Biden? Like you said in his, speech, he talked a lot about unity and, that people need to come together to solve the problems that are imminent. And I was wondering, like, this is something that you probably are more aware of than me or others, who are, not living in the US, for example, but, in Europe, for example, there was, if I looked at the news after, he became the president, there was a lot of talk about, these executive orders that he has, signed and the things he has, reverted and stuff. And I was just, maybe you can give us more specifics, like what has he actually done and to back up what he was talking about, if you can give us a bit more details about that.
Well, so Joe Biden ran on this platform of unity, and he talked about it in his inaugural address. But also putting that into action is challenging as well. And in his first few days as president, he has signed many different executive orders. Basically, an executive order is the president directing the government to take a certain action. It can be challenged in the court of law. So someone can sue the president and say, this executive action is illegal, you can't do it. But a president has a right to sign an executive action. And Joe Biden, basically in his first days as president, has signed executive actions to undo executive actions that Donald Trump signed into law. And I think many people on the conservative side of the country, they are taking a little bit of grief with that because they view it as not a sign of unity, but a sign of divisiveness, that Joe Biden isn't trying to pass laws through Congress as much so as he's trying to do it on his own. Now, I think what Joe Biden's administration and the supporters of Joe Biden would say is, well, he's doing what needs to be done, right? The executive orders that he's signing are executive orders to reestablish certain moral characteristics of the United States. I mean, one of those being stopping deportations, reuniting kids with their families that were separated at the border, signing executive orders regarding climate change and the environment, student loans. So he's taking actions that I think are supported by the majority of the people. The majority of the people say these are certain things that need to happen, and they need to happen quickly because people's lives are being directly affected by these orders. Another one is the Muslim ban, right? The ban on people from Muslim countries, right? He got rid of that. So he's taken actions that I think the majority of people agree with and support. Now, to your question, how is this going to play out going forward? That's the $1 million question. And I think what the Biden administration is trying to do is trying to craft policies that both sides of the country can come to some agreement on fairly easily. Because there's certain issues in the country that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed very quickly. And they cannot be addressed, or maybe it's not best to address them through an executive order. It's best to address them through Congress and through passing laws. So I think his administration is going to try to put a big effort into passing laws that can gain bipartisan support, so that there's a show of unity, so that there's a show of togetherness within Congress.
I mean, this is a question that adds on to this. Like, I mean, in the news, we always hear about this. Like, I'm not so familiar with this either, and don't know. I mean, I know roughly how it works, but not exactly how it works. But they always talk about, maybe you can explain it a bit more. They always talk about, if a president doesn't have a majority in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, that it's difficult for him to pass laws and stuff. Where's the connection there, and how is the situation at the moment in the US? That would be interesting to know.
So in order to pass laws in the United States, they have to go through Congress. And in Congress, there is the House of Representatives, there is the Senate, and then there is the White House, right? So basically, whoever's in control of those three entities has a big say in whether or not the laws get passed. At the current moment, the Democrats, which Joe Biden is a Democrat, he's part of the Democratic Party, the Democrats hold a supermajority, meaning that they control the House of Representatives as well as the Senate and the White House. So therefore, the theory is, or the idea is, it should be fairly easy for Joe Biden to pass laws that he wants to pass. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because what ends up having to happen is, or the way laws are passed rather, is the House of Representatives, they debate and they vote. And once they vote on a law, it gets sent to the Senate. And then the Senate has to debate, and then they have to vote. And if there's a majority of votes, then the law is passed and it's sent to the White House for the president to sign into law. That's a very simplistic way of how it works. Now, like I said, currently the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives. So basically, they send laws to the Senate to debate. Now, in the Senate, Democrats have control, but it's a very, very small level of control. So at the very moment, and just so the viewers understand, in the Senate, there are 100 senators in the United States government.
Is
there's
that
two
two
senators
for each state, right? Yeah.
There's 2 senators for each state within the United States. Right now, it's a dead split. So there's 50 Republicans and there's 50 Democrats in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
In order to break the tie, the vice president has to vote. Now, the vice president, Kamala Harris, is a Democrat. So this is the reason why Democrats now have a supermajority and they control the Senate, because she is the tiebreaker. Where this becomes complicated is not all Democrats are very liberal Democrats. Some of them are very moderate, centrist kind of Democrats. And so not every Democrat is like Bernie Sanders, right? And Bernie Sanders is a more liberal kind of Democrat. So
does it mean like when you know, if it's a decision has to be made that you would actually have Democrats not voting for a law that, you know, was suggested in the House of Representatives, or is that
right? So this is where it gets complicated, because it's not a guarantee that every Democrat is going to vote for a law that the House of Representatives sent over for them to debate. It's also not a guarantee that every Republican is going to be against the law, because right now there's some very moderate Republicans in the U.S. Senate. Mitt Romney from the state of Utah, Susan Collins from the state of Maine, Lisa Murkowski from the state of Alaska. They're very moderate Republicans who we consider them like a swing vote. Right? They could go either way. Now, they tend to be more conservative and support conservative values, but they have shown a very independent kind of streak of willing to go against their party, you know, in order to get things done. So there isn't a guarantee that because the Democrats control the House of Representatives and they send a law to the Senate, that all Democrats are going to get on board and going to support it. And that means it's going to be sent to Joe Biden, you know, for him to sign into law.
Interesting. I mean, something that you've talked about, and I think that is also being discussed, is, you know, what should you do with like the student debt, basic student loan debt. In the previous podcast, when we were talking about the university system in the US, we talked about, you know, how expensive university education is in the US, and just to you know, mention the numbers again. So if you want to do a bachelor's degree in the US, you have to pay between around $60,000 to $300,000 or more for, you know, an average of 4 years of studies. And also looking at the facts and figures, the average US American student ends up with $32,000 in student loan debt. And I heard there was a discussion about, you know, what is happening in this kind of respect.
So student loan debt is a very big topic right now in the United States, and it's been mainly fueled by the pandemic, because due to the pandemic, student loan repayment has been frozen. So now let me be more specific. If you hold loans through the federal government, those loans have been frozen. Now, if you have loans through the private sector, say through a private bank, then those loans may or may not be frozen depending on that bank. So at the moment, student loan repayment is frozen. Now, there has been a lot of talk about, okay, this may be a moment for the United States to reform not only education, but student loan debt as well. And there are different ideas that have been placed on the table. One idea that's been supported and promoted by Bernie Sanders and the very liberal wing of the Democratic Party is total loan forgiveness. So to basically wipe the slate clean and to forgive every single student loan that currently exists. And there's currently...
Oh yeah, I was about to ask, do you have a number on this? How much would that roughly be? Or
so currently there's approximately 1.3 to 1.4 trillion dollars. That's with a T, trillion dollars in student loan debt. And so Bernie Sanders' argument and the liberal wing of the Democratic Party's argument is let's remove that burden from students or people who are paying student loans. Because if we relieve them of that burden, they will be able to contribute towards the economy more, which will help revive the economy and push economic growth within the country. Mm-hmm. Now, the more moderate Democrats don't support a full student loan forgiveness for everybody. Mm-hmm. There's been proposals of, for example, Elizabeth Warren, who also ran for president from the state of Massachusetts. She's proposed forgiving up to $50,000 in student loan debt. At the current, or at least the last time I read, Joe Biden has proposed more or less about $10,000 in student debt, at the moment. Now I think he's open to maybe more than that, but he wants to start small and then, see how it goes, because Joe Biden's position has been, he wants Congress to work it out, basically. So he wants Congress to come to an agreement on how to deal with student loan debt. Now, many scholars say that actually Joe Biden has the power to forgive all student loans if he wants to. The way the laws are written, he has the power today to sign into law full student loan forgiveness if he wants to do it. Joe Biden says he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't believe it would hold up in a court of law. So if somebody sued the government saying that's not right or that's illegal, then he doesn't believe it would be able to stand up, in the court of law. So he wants Congress to work it out. Now, the way Republicans view it and the proposals that Donald Trump and the Republicans put forward over the past 4 years was not any student loan forgiveness, but rather allowing more flexibility for repaying the loans. So making the repayment plans more flexible to give students a more broad and easier way to repay the loans. So the topic is one that's currently being debated in the public discourse. We'll see what happens. But my feeling is that there will be some level of student loan forgiveness. It's just a matter of how much is going to be forgiven.
Interesting. And is there any discussion about how this will, continue in the future? Are universities going to be for free? Because we talked about it in like one of the previous podcasts that, there are several countries in the world where, not the majority, I guess, but there are several countries, where, university education is basically for free. And is this a model that the US might be willing to adopt? Is it actually possible? Do you know anything more about that?
So this is also being openly debated at the moment as well. What Joe Biden has supported in the past, or at least when he was running for president, was to make all community colleges free. So really small.
What does that mean? Because for the listeners and someone who's not very familiar with the US, like what is the difference between a community college and a university, or is there a difference between a community college, a college, and a university? Like maybe you can extend on this a bit.
So if a student goes to a community college, it's generally a 2-year program. So once they graduate, they finish with what we call an associate's degree. Now, that degree can be used to go on to university or to another level of education. But generally speaking, it's a 2-year type of program, whereas a university is geared towards a 4-year type of program. And you come out with, or you graduate with a bachelor's and maybe even potentially a master's, depending on the program of study. So it's a shorter program. And because of that, is generally cheaper as well. So what Joe Biden has shown support for it, and also other politicians as well, I think from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, to make this level of education free for everybody.
Interesting.
Now, that still doesn't address the issue of university and how much the cost of university is, because that's where the majority of students end up. And so that's a little bit more complicated. Politicians like Bernie Sanders and the liberal part of the Democratic Party, they want to make all public education free. So from kindergarten through 4 years of university, it's free. But even moderate Democrats and even moderate Republicans also say, well, even if we can't make it free, we have to do something to make it more affordable. So we need to do something to control the cost of higher education, tertiary education, because right now it's out of control. And it increases every year. So every year it becomes even more out of control. So there's still an open debate about how to make it more affordable, what mechanisms need to happen or to be put into place to do that. But I think there's a general consensus that there needs to be something done about the cost of tertiary education.
I mean, this is interesting what you mentioned, because I mean, now I'm living in the UK at the moment, and the university system there is like, is interesting, because basically it doesn't really matter to which university you go to, you have to pay the same amount of money. So if you go to, I don't know, if you go to a, I would say, a normal university, or if you go to Oxford or Cambridge, you still have to pay the same amount of money. And from what we've talked about, is that, in the US, for example, you have these like elite universities that charge, I know, 60,000 or more for a year of tuition or fees. And this is this a model that might be introduced in the or might have a, the potential for being introduced, instead of like, that you make it fairer, that you like, it doesn't really matter where you go because you have to pay the same tuition fees? Or is this something that you think, I mean, this is just an assumption that you need to make at this point. Is this something that, is there a talk about this, or is this something that you think would actually work, or just if you can answer?
Well,
basically.
I think in an ideal world, it would be nice. The problem is, I think even the universities would push back against this one fee kind of system where, no matter where you go, it costs the same amount, because in the United States, these universities want to be able to differentiate themselves from other schools, and I think they would be probably not happy if the student has to pay the same amount to go to the University of San Diego as they do to go to Harvard, right? I mean, I think there would be some kind of pushback against that. But right now, to be quite honest with you, I don't really know what is being discussed as far as, if we don't make it free, then how do we make it more affordable? Because just handing out money, we talked about this in the past, in the previous episode that we did about tertiary education, in that basically, once you graduate from high school, students are given this money, these loans, to go to school. And, many times they don't fully realize and understand the magnitude of what they've done until they graduate or until they finish their education, and then they have to start paying them back. And so I think there's been a lot of talk about having more accountability around handing out this money, right? Because listen, if you're 18 years old,
it's just like, I was just saying, it's just like when you want to have a credit or from a bank or something, and basically the bank doesn't check any of your background. It's like, exactly.
Exactly. So if you're 18 years old and you go to a bank and you say, I want to borrow $50,000 to buy a car, they're probably not going to loan you that money, right? Because you don't have a good enough credit history. You haven't shown yourself capable enough to repay that money back. But it's not the same with student loans. I mean, literally, the government will hand you $50,000 and say, here you go, good luck. And, you're responsible for that when you come out. And like I said before in the previous episode, many times students don't fully recognize and realize, the magnitude of what they've done until they get that first notice in the mail saying, now it's time to start paying these back. And this is what your monthly payment is going to be. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around student loans. How do we give student loans? How are student loans managed? And how that all works. Now, we currently in the US, we have what we call the Consumer Protection Bureau. I think that's the name, the Consumer Protection Bureau, which is tasked with protecting consumers. So protecting consumers against fraudulent kind of or predatory kind of bank activities, even when it comes to student loans as well. And so we do have a government entity that is trying to work on behalf of Americans to make sure they're not being lured into taking loans or taking on debt without realizing what they're doing. Because we had an issue that came up, maybe a few years ago, where, so in the US, we have what we call for-profit schools, for-profit universities. So basically, they're out to make a profit, right? I mean, they're in education, but their end goal is to also make a profit. Well, some of these schools went bankrupt and or lost accreditation.
Okay.
And so students who went to these schools or students who graduated from these schools, they argued, well, my degree doesn't mean anything anymore. The school doesn't exist anymore. So, and now I have thousands of dollars in student loan debt. So what am I supposed to do now? Because a company won't hire me because they won't accept my degree from the school anymore. But now you're wanting me to pay back these student loans. So we ran into this issue where where the students basically asked the government to forgive these loans completely, fully, 100%. Forgive all the loans from these schools that went bankrupt or lost accreditation, these for-profit schools that basically no longer exist. I say this to say, as a part of the reform and the part of the change that has to happen with education and student loan debt, there has to be a mechanism in there. If education isn't going to be completely free, there has to be a part that protects the student and educates the student and make sure the student realizes and understands what they're getting into.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I think this is what you said. If you're young at the age of 17, 18, and you're just starting your adult life, basically, you don't even know, because nobody teaches you at secondary school, you don't know how to handle money and these things, right? And what you're saying, I mean, you're not fully aware of what it means to have $60,000 in debts or something, or maybe 30,000 or whatever it is, but tens of thousands, right? And that this kind of will haunt you throughout the rest of your life if you don't manage to get a high paying job or something, which I don't think is the norm, right? So it's not like you're going to find a job that pays you $100,000, $200,000 a year that you're I can pay this off very easily or something, So that was interesting. I mean, my last question about this topic would be this is an assumption that you need to make on your part. I know, you're not an expert or something, but I'm wondering, where do you think the US is headed in the next 4 years, maybe 8 years or something, but maybe where is it headed in the next 4 years? What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to see any major changes or anything? Like I said, I know you're not a politician or, you cannot look into the future, but what do you think is on the horizon in the near future?
Well, I think in the US, we're going to see probably big changes when it comes to the environment. The Biden administration has put together a team of experts and professionals who take climate change and protecting the environment very seriously. So I think in the near future, we're going to see laws being presented and debated about what do we do about fossil fuels, what do we do about clean energy. The U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement or the Paris Accords, and so what does the U.S. do about the global community? What does the U.S. do about addressing poorer countries who maybe aren't able to economically and financially meet the goals of the Paris Accord? What is the U.S. going to be willing to do about that? I think these are all questions that are going to have to be answered fairly soon because of the aggressive nature at which the Biden administration is going when it comes to the environment. I think the other thing is going to be infrastructure. So both Republicans and Democrats have been talking for years and years and years about how do we fix our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, these kind of things, to bring them up to 21st century standards. Germany has very nice, I think, a very nice infrastructure system. I think for most Germans who come to the U.S., they may be a little bit surprised at the condition of some of our infrastructure. And so I think this is something that probably the Biden administration will try to also get done because there is bipartisan support that something needs to happen. I think we're also probably going to see something with healthcare relatively soon. The Biden administration, or Joe Biden rather, ran for president on a platform of making healthcare more accessible to Americans. And given that we're in a pandemic and that many people are in need of health coverage, I think he's probably going to push this relatively hard in the near future. Because remember, he's a new president, so he has a certain level of political will and political capital, rather, to try to get things done. Basically, political capital being Republicans are going to give him the benefit of the doubt for a very short amount of time and say, okay, we want a show of unity, we want to show of bipartisanship, so we're going to allow you or help you to get something done. It only lasts for a short or a very small window of time. So I think in this very small window of time, he's probably going to try to address these issues, among maybe other ones like immigration as well, because this is also a big issue right now in the U.S. The problem is we have a lot of big issues that need to be addressed.
Every country has, right, in a way,
Well, every country has, but I think there's a lot of big issues that have been neglected. I'm not even blaming Donald Trump for this or the Trump administration. These are issues that even go back to the Obama administration that were never really addressed properly, and things are now coming to a head, right? They're coming to a point where something has to be done. And so, I think the path forward over the next 4 years is going to be, I think, an aggressive one. Because here's the other thing you have to remember as well. We have these political cycles. Every 2 years, there's an election. Now, every 4 years, there's an election for a new president. But every 2 years, there's an election for members of the House of Representatives, members of the Senate. So many of these congressmen and congresswomen are up for re-election. And they need something to take back to their constituents to say, hey, I did this, I got this done for you. Your community is now safer, better than it was before, because they want to stay in power. The second thing is, because of this political cycle, it doesn't necessarily mean the Democrats are going to maintain a supermajority in the government. So in 2 years, when there's an election, Joe Biden could very well find himself in a position where the Democrats no longer control both houses of Congress. So I think that's going to be another incentive and motivation for him to try to get as much as he can get done in these first 2 years, because he learned, I think, from the Obama administration, right? When Obama became President Obama or Barack Obama became president in 2008, he also had a supermajority. So Democrats controlled both the House of Representatives as well as the U.S. Senate, and he was a Democrat, so they controlled the White House as well. And really, there were only a handful of major pieces of legislation that he was able to get done. One being healthcare, which we now call Obamacare. One being fair pay for women, or equal pay for women. But beyond that, after those 2 years passed, he had a very hard time getting anything done because he lost, or let me say, Democrats lost control of the House of Representatives. So it was much more difficult to negotiate, how to get things done. So I think Joe Biden recognizes this. I think Joe Biden has been in politics long enough. This goes back to the experience that we talked about before. He recognizes, I think, that he has a very short window of time to try to get as much done as he can, so that his name can be placed on these things. And he can also say, listen, I got this done for the country.
Interesting. Chris, thanks for your input about this topic.
Yep, you're welcome.